recovered? How did people come to realise what the icon traditionally had been like? There are several elements in this story. Certainly as far as Russia is concerned, it seems to be a tangled story of scholarship and connoisseurship. The scholarly element, which is by no means a purely Russian story, can be seen as a series of, I think, often quite separate, disparate, even mutually contradictory attempts to regain some sort of understanding of the Byzantine Empire, a positive understanding of this, and a positive understanding of those cultures that depended on it, or yes, depended on it, like Russian culture, for instance, Slav culture. In the 19th century, the scholarly account of what had happened was really a story of decline and fall. And there is a famous book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. And the icon fitted altogether too easily into this. The icon was regarded as a form of art that was not as good as had existed in Hellenistic times. The notion of perspective had vanished, for instance, and so on. And that proper art was rediscovered, maybe with Giotto or something like that, and then in the Renaissance was properly rediscovered. And that notion is really it's the artistorical version of what Gibbon was saying in his book about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, by which And in the 19th century, you find various scholars attempting to roll back this narrative and to reappreciate the culture that could be easily be described as really one of the most successful cultures that there ever has been. The Byzantine Empire, you might say, lasted from 330 until 1453. That's a very, very long time. And longer than the Roman Empire, for instance, before it. And various people began in various ways to attempt to rediscover this. Now, there are a number of people who applied this attempt to get back behind the traditional account to art itself. And there are various people, various names. Alois Riedel, who was an Austrian, Joseph Strigowski, who was a Czech, Nikodem Kontoglou, and another Dmitry Androv. These are the main people in the 19th century who began. If you go into the 20th century, you get other names. Robert Byron, for instance, in his book about the Eastern origins of Western art, is doing essentially the same kind of thing. But the people who started it were these people from Eastern Europe entirely, Eastern Europe and Russia. The name of Nikodem Kontoglou is particularly important for us, though it remains in the background, as he will come up again later. Kontoglou was an art historian who taught from 1888 in St. Petersburg. And as part of an attempt to reach back behind Gibbon's narrative, Kontoglou realised the importance of the Byzantine icon for Russian culture. And something he explored in a book that he'd written with another art historian called Salomon Reinach, which is, in the Western world, most well known in its French translation, and La Rive Meridionale. After the revolution, Kontoglou moved, as many of the future emigres did, to the Ukraine, first to Odessa, and then to Yalta in Crimea. And then, anticipating the ship of the philosophers, he settled first in Bulgaria in 1920, and then in Czechoslovakia, where he became professor of art history in Prague, and remained there for the rest of his life. One of his students in Prague was Julia Reitlinger, who we should, Academia might actually say something about. And one of his colleagues in Prague, or among his colleagues in Prague in the early 20s, would have been included people like Bulgakov and Swarovski, both of whom had a brief time teaching in Prague before they went on to Paris. Now this renewed appreciation of the icon as the art form of Byzantine civilization, passed on to the Russians, led to a realization that the icon in this form had been quite simply lost. Lost because it was completely covered with dirt. The icons in churches were lost because, first of all, the last stage in painting an icon is painting a surface of olive oil, oliva, which is applied at the final stage of icon painting. And olive oil darkens over the years if it's in a warm place. And if it has icon candles in front of it, it will get dark. It will get warm. So the actual covering itself, the actual last thing, which is meant to bring out the colours, actually was making the colours impossible to see. So there were, and in addition to which, there was an accumulation of grime and soot from candles and the incense in which they were honoured, to which had been added the practice of reviving icons by repainting them, and just painting on top. Sometimes trying to imitate what was underneath, sometimes actually doing something relatively different. And this could happen several times. So an icon that was originally in the 15th century, by the 19th century, what you're looking at completely covered up what was originally there in the 15th or 14th century. And of course, actually, many icons were just simply destroyed and replaced. Particularly the case in the reign of Catherine the Great, when it became fashionable to get rid of the old icons and replace them with bright new ones in Western fashion. By the middle of the 19th century, ways of cleaning icons were discovered. To begin with, a crude and hazardous process, where you're basically pouring acid over them and then wiping it off when it cleared away as much as what you wanted. But it's a hazardous process because it might have actually taken away what you wanted to discover rather than revealing it. Nevertheless, even though it was crude, in many cases, it was suddenly discovered that icons were coloured, that they were not black, dim things often covered by a metal or clad that completely covered it. But they were actually full of colour. Though in the 19th century, as I understand it, and the scholarship of this is very bitty, there's no real general account I can think of. In the 19th century, there were attempts made. There's somebody a painter called Podlushnikov, who in 1852 cleaned the icons of the 13th century iconostasis in the Uspensky Cathedral in Moscow. And a little later, the early 15th century icons in the cathedral in Vladimir, icons understood to be by Andrew Louth. But it was a hazardous process, and the church authorities were not altogether enthusiastic about it because they were afraid it would do more harm than good. And it was only in the first decade of the 20th century that the cleaning of the icons really got underway, with a process that wasn't, by modern standards, was terrible, but still wasn't as bad as it had been in the past. And one of the things that was discovered around about 1905, 1906, was that the Novgorod icons, the icons of the Novgorod school, instead of being these dark boards that they'd appeared to be in churches, were amazingly colourful. There was an astonishing revelation of the colour of the icon. That's one stage, which I really would like to expand sometime, and I have expanded it quite a bit from what I originally. But I said that is, in a sense, the scholarly side, or inspired by a scholarly perception that behind all this there was the real art of Byzantium, and it could be recovered. The other side is the role of the connoisseurs of art. And this is